right, a couple minutes after 1, looks like a lot of participants have been able to log in. So I want to welcome you to the 2024 Recreational Trails Program Grant Workshop. Kelly and I are with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and we are within the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. My name is Crystal McKelvey. I am the Chief Recreation Grants Manager.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Seaton. I'm the Recreation Grants Coordinator working with Crystal and our grants team at DCR. I'm also the primary RTP administrator, so I'll be your main point of contact as you move forward to submit applications and hopefully move forward with an award for funding.
Right. So just some general housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and transcribed. The video will be posted to the RTP website. Typically, it can take a day or two for that. You can enter questions into the chat box on the right at any time, and we will stop occasionally to respond. You are all set to mute and also camera off, but at the end, we can try to open the microphones if you want to ask questions out loud. To turn on captions in the upper right of your screen, you can click More, Language and Speech, and turn on live captions. The agenda today is to go over the RTP funding, eligibility for projects, how to administer those projects, how to get reimbursed once your project is active, but ultimately this is to focus on the application process and guidance. An overview of the Recreational Trails Program. This is a federal program. The purpose is to provide, expand, and improve public recreational trail opportunities for both motorized and non-motorized properties. Excuse me. The funding does come from the U.S. Department of Transportation through the Federal Highway Administration. Since 1993 in RTP, Virginia, we have had over 350 projects awarded. The 2024 grant award amounts. So for this year, we can go ahead and get right to it. The federal fiscal year 2023 Virginia apportionment is $1.4 million. Plus, we've had some past awards that have completed under the budget. So currently, we have almost $2 million available. That money, as determined by the federal agency, must be divided among 3 categories. So that's 30% for motorized and non-motorized, and then 40% goes to the diversified category. So for this year, the non-motorized has $435,000 available. We expect that to cover about 2 or 3 grants. Motorized has $630,000 available. And then the diversified has about $1 million available. You can see here that there are different minimum and maximum grant awards depending upon the money available, but the minimum request is $50,000 for all 3 categories. That equals a total project cost of $62,500 because this is an 80-20 match program. All right, so the funding is quite competitive. Of course, we really wish we had more money for this, but the $1.4 million is determined by the federal agency and the pots of money that go into that. You can see the numbers here for the past 3 years of applicants versus funded, and it averages around 20% have been able to be funded. So the payments are made on a reimbursement basis. This is a match reimbursement program. You do not get the funding up front. You must be able to fund the project fully with periodic reimbursements. You can make as many reimbursement requests as you need. So the match requirement is a minimum of 20% of the total project cost. For example, a $100,000 grant requires a $25,000 match so that your total project cost really is $125,000. There are multiple ways to calculate your match or provide that. On the left, there's a lot of options. Mostly it's cash, but you can also do force account labor. That can be in-kind items, volunteer labor, which is quite valuable these days at $32.59 per hour. You can also use equipment use rates if you keep very careful logs and documentation, and then that has to be compared to the local or federal rates of specific equipment. It is possible to use other grants to match, but it is very important to plan ahead and tell us any plans to use those options up front. The federal highways cannot reimburse requests with non-cash shares without forward planning and letting them know. You must be able to provide the grant agreements from other programs to make sure they don't conflict with the RTP requirements. There's also the option for donations that can look different for different projects. And then in-kind labor, materials, and equipment. So what do you have on hand? Who are you going to have work that's within your locality or entity? And you do still have to record their hours, their value. It can be salary, including fringe, and we can talk more about those options with you. Um, and then within limitations, the pre-award environmental review and design cost could be used if they are done within, typically within 90 days from being awarded is the best way to do that. None of these items can be added after authorization. So again, it's very important to outline these in your application, your proposed budget, so that we can write those into the grant agreements. All right, so the schedule, here we are in 2024. March 12th, the grant round opened, and thank you all for attending this webinar. We have 66 people right now, which I think is one of our highest attended. The applications are due May 7th. We cannot accept any applications after that day. Please email them in by 4 p.m. We will be monitoring and confirming that they are received. If you need to send a zip folder or if you have any problems, please let us know ahead of time as best you can. From May to June, the applications will be reviewed by DCR staff and the RTP Advisory Committee. In late June, the applicants of projects recommended for funding will be contacted. And then July and August, the site inspections will be completed by PRR staff and the process of preparing the federal highway documentation will begin. In September, the project authorizations and grant agreements should become released, and it is very important to not begin any work until you do get a grant agreement. This is largely based on the federal the federal fiscal year process, which closes September 30th and then reopens October 1st. So we really are working towards getting those authorized in September. So that is our schedule, and Kelly's going to talk more about the applicants.
All right, thanks, Crystal. So as far as eligible applicants for this program, it does have a wider eligibility than some of the other grants that we're able to offer because it's allowed in the RTP regulations. So most types of government organizations are eligible applicants, so city, town, county governments, and kind of affiliated recreation departments of those. Other state agencies can apply, and our own DCR state agency can apply for work as well. Tribal governments, other federal government agencies can apply. Public recreation government entities. So by that we mean kind of the like code established park authorities can apply on as applicants, and then really any type of nonprofit organization. But for nonprofit organizations, we do, and it's outlined in the application guidance, we ask for a letter of support from your local government body. And I'll get into that a little bit here later. And also, so for any of these applicants, if you do not own the applicant doesn't own the land in which the work is going to be completed, we also need a letter of support from the landowner or other documentation showing you have a legal right to use that property for that purpose. So this year, eligible project types, we're back to our kind of every eligible project type can be submitted. So last year we implemented and we're continuing this forward that in even years, such as this year, we will do kind of an open grant round in which new construction and new trail construction is eligible. last year and next year in the odd years will be only maintenance and amenities for existing trails. And this is due to historically those maintenance and amenity projects did not compete well against new trail construction. So we kind of separated that out, and we do expect to primarily fund the new construction this year. But if you have a maintenance or amenity project, you can still apply, and it will, if in reviewing our scoring criteria, I think it will compete pretty well. We definitely encourage you to still apply for those types of projects this year. So the eligible project types we have outlined here, construction, maintenance, rehabilitation of trails, that kind of covers most of the project types that we get in, but also any type of amenity or facility either along the trail or at a trailhead generally can be eligible as well, and that includes water trails. Specific, if it, kind of not covered in those items above, if you have specific features or changes to a trail that that would serve to increase access for people with disabilities. And then the next item here, I have a little star there because lease or purchase of trail construction and maintenance equipment. So previously we were only able to fund really lease of trail construction equipment. But due to a waiver of the Buy America iron and steel sourcing requirements that passed last fall, grants that are awarding grants that will be awarded this year do not have to follow those domestic sourcing requirements, which opens up the opportunity to purchase equipment. Now, just note that there will be kind of some extra stipulations as far as taking the federal equipment. And you will have to do kind of report, I believe it's every 2-year reporting through the life of the equipment until it falls below $5,000 in value. And you can kind of only use it for an RTP eligible type project. If you buy any piece of equipment, you couldn't then use it for other general maintenance needs of your organization. It would have to be focused on something that you could do with an RTP grant. And then the last item here is you can both acquire property with this grant and do a more general assessment of your trail conditions for accessibility or maintenance needs if that is paired with a any of the other eligible project types. So we need to end up with a constructed element like on the ground that the public can use, but you can do those two items as kind of part of a project. If you have a small acquisition to be able to complete something, you can do that as well. All right, here's some examples of eligible projects. So new construction, we already talked about, that's pretty, pretty broad of what you can do. I note here that paddle launches or motorboat ramps or launches on water trails are eligible, in addition to work on kind of more traditional land trails or land-based trails. Trail maintenance, and that can be kind of larger scale maintenance things, or it could be more of your routine maintenance, such as brushing, reblazing, removing hazard trees. Improvements to an existing trail, such as resurfacing or paving a trail that previously had a natural surface, and doing reroutes. Trailhead, so you could develop or expand a trailhead or add improvements to an existing trailhead. We do get frequent applications for parking lot improvements or adding restrooms in a high-use trailhead, signage and both wayfinding or interpretive signs at trailheads. Bridges along trails are certainly eligible, and then amenities kind of at any of these types of facilities or features. So along the trail or at a trailhead, and these can be kind of small amenities, some benches, dog waste stations, wayfinding signage, or safety lighting, things, anything like that, and tactile models, other features that would increase the accessibility of your trail for people with disabilities are also eligible. And then, as already discussed, lease or purchase of equipment to use for specifically an eligible type of project work that can continue after the project period is done, but it would have to continue to be used for that kind of, purchase the equipment only to do trail maintenance uses. All right, here's a list of a few things that are not eligible. So one would be boat launches that are on either lakes or other waters that don't have a water trail destination. So this program allows us to fund some, access and amenities along water trails, but it's really focused on the trail element of water. So if it's a kind of a body of water that doesn't that you wouldn't necessarily do a point A to point B experience on, we can't fund those currently. And so related to that would be fishing piers. Again, the projects that we can fund on water trails are around accessing that point A to point B experience and using the trail in that way. So we're not currently able to fund fishing piers. And then any kind of recreation facility that is standalone and maybe a destination in and of itself and is not directly related to the trail use. So these could be things like playgrounds or campgrounds that are located near a trailhead, but they would likely be accessed independently from using the trail, and trail users wouldn't, or the users of those facilities wouldn't necessarily be using the trails. And that's similar to the next point there of a larger visitor center, community center that serves multiple purposes in addition to trail support. Now, if it's a small like trail interpretive center that really is focused on a trail system or something, we might be able to do some expenses related to that, but a broader one would not be eligible. And I've already discussed the equipment for general maintenance that's not focused on trails. We can't fund that currently. And then this is related, the last item here is related to the acquisition needing a developed built component too. So we cannot acquire property that you aren't going to develop within the scope of the grant. You'd have to have at least something constructed as part of the project as well. All right. So eligible costs, really most costs incurred in the development and construction of any of the eligible projects can be submitted for reimbursement. This slide's kind of similar to our Crystal's match slide. So preliminary engineering is what we call kind of the first half of your project where you're doing your design, engineering, environmental review work, all of that. Those costs can be included. Your grant administrative time, frequently we'll have folks use their grant administrative time as match. It's a way to, add a little bit value of the time you're spending. And we acknowledge that you do have to do some extra effort to comply with the procedures that are necessary for the grant. So you can include that. Force account, so your entities work on the project, whether that's through the design, permitting, environmental review side of it, or actually in the field doing construction. We can use force account labor for both of those as an expense that you can be reimbursed for, not just as your match. And then any contractors or consultants you hire to do any of the eligible costs, their fees are also eligible. Construction. Oh, I see the question here, force account labor. So that was, we're using that term to describe employees of your own locality working on the project. So, in our case, if DCR State Parks was awarded the grant and State Park staff are working on the project, it would be what we'd consider force account labor. Construction materials, so anything you're buying for, to construct and complete this project. Equipment, like with the limitations I already discussed about, being used specifically for RTP eligible type projects going forward, and amenities for all of those. All right, and there's a couple things that are ineligible. Feasibility study. So if it's a more general feasibility study before you're ready to design and construct this trail, we can't fund that currently. Food and gifts, and this comes up sometimes when volunteers are building the project. So those are not eligible. Any rental equipment that is kind of a thing that could walk off on its own, like kayaks. Sometimes we get requests for kayaks. We can't fund those. Most legal fees we cannot fund, though some related, like if you were doing a land acquisition, there may be a little bit of legal work that we can fund. If that's something you're interested in, please reach out to us. Any late payment fees are something that would be as a result of kind of negligence or an omission on the part of the project sponsor would be ineligible and not able to be reimbursed. And then anything, as Crystal mentioned previously, the key is that any of the eligible expenses and scope have to be outlined in the project agreement. And so anything that's not in that project agreement when we originally authorized the project, we might not be able to get funding for. So we want to make sure that that's really comprehensive when we do that. So I'm going to pause now for some questions. I know I saw some came in. I haven't seen what they all are. Crystal, was there
Um,
anything that you need me to address?
I haven't written any answers, so I can read them out loud for everybody. One was, if you are currently designing a pedestrian trail, can that design cost be retroactively reimbursed?
Yes, so in short, maybe, I guess maybe would be the short answer, but design costs that were incurred up to 18 months prior to the authorization. So as Crystal mentioned, we think the authorizations will be in September this year. So up to 18 months prior to that would be the range of expenses that could be eligible, design and environmental expenses. But the key to make them eligible for reimbursement is that they would have had to have been procured following the same procurement procedures that we'll outline a little later that are um, basically you have to follow some type of competitive procurement that is in line with the state public procurement regulations. So if you have documentation of that, those costs and how they were incurred, and you have the invoices and proof of payments, typically we can use those to credit towards your project.
Great. Another question, if a project budget exceeds what RTP generally funds, is it possible to apply for partial coverage of a total budget?
Yes, so you can, and we do frequently see that, and we know that the amount of funds we have available are very small in comparison to what it costs to build trails nowadays, and even trail amenities nowadays. So we do frequently get that. We typically encourage folks to try to make the RTP project. It doesn't have to be standalone, but sometimes if you're able to kind of chunk off a part of the project that's just the RTP side of it, it may simplify things so that you don't have to do some of the other, some of the grant requirements for your entire larger project. But we also have projects in the last few years that we've done that we have where we are, RTP is kind of the small fish in there, and we are able to provide the funding, but you will have to comply with the environmental review and the procurement and everything that RTP requires for your whole larger project.
Okay. Another question, if a project, no, could an awarded project comprise only preliminary engineering work, no actual construction completed? I can answer that RTP projects must have a built component. It's not just for preliminary engineering, it must result in construction.
Okay.
Then a couple more questions. Let's see. This is really exciting. Are soil and water conservation districts eligible for the grant?
Yes, they they would be eligible for the grant.
They're political subdivisions of the state. So as long as there's proper staff to be able to administer it, that would be good. Then could grant funds, let's see if I'm getting right. Could grant funds be used to create an endowment for future trail maintenance? I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, go ahead,
I'm
Kelly.
sorry, I was gonna say that would be related to our current requirement that you have to end up with a constructed, like on the ground piece. So we really can only fund work that's being done, within the project period. We will do the NEPA level environmental review for the specific work you're looking to do in the project period. Now, related to that, though, you could buy a piece of trail maintenance equipment that then you can use for future trail maintenance. But kind of that equipment purchase is probably the only exception to the project itself needing to result in a constructed element.
I would also add that grant funds, you get reimbursed 80% of this. So you get a lot of bang for your buck, and you could use that returned fund to then turn it around for future trail maintenance. Obviously, it depends on your foundation or your localities, funding and finance mechanisms. But that would be an option. Also could use reimbursed funds. Okay, I think we have one more for now. If the costs are unknown for easement acquisition at the time of the application, what would DCR suggest be done? Easement
Yeah,
acquisition, yeah.
and this may depend on the type of applicant that you are. So if um, because we do both request that you have, proof of the right of way or an agreement with the seller. So likely you maybe wouldn't be far enough ahead. We outlined some requirements for acquisitions in our manual. But so we would I guess the limitation will be we award funds based on what you ask for. So we wouldn't be able to add additional funds to the award, above what you asked for in the application. So we really need some type of estimate, I guess, because we don't frequently do acquisition projects. There's other grant programs that are, more typically used for land acquisition. We haven't walked through this in recent years, so it may look a little different, but as we get into it, but eventually you will need a federal level UASFLA appraisal. We don't currently require that at the time of application, but you will have to do that, and that may be a time to probably the best time to do that would be when you get that notice of that you're likely to move forward after we review all the applications. And we could do that before you get the award so we know if we're going to be able to award you enough funds to complete your project.
All right, we'll just do two more in interest of time. If the grant recipient slash locality already has an existing term contract with an engineer, will that suffice for procurement purposes? Typically, localities are already following state procurement procedures or even stricter procedures internally. So as long as that procurement can be proven, if asked, then that should be okay. In other words, term contracts are okay. It doesn't have to be contracted per RTP. I hope that helps. And then let's see, can nonprofits receive the funding directly or in addition to letter of support from a locality? Would the locality act as a fiscal agent?
So nonprofits do receive the funds directly.
All right. I think we've answered them all for now. Thanks for the great questions, everybody. All right, so now we may have gotten into some of this already, but I will discuss more details about the process that will proceed for project administration for all those that are selected for funding. Sometimes I think people believe that federal grants are really difficult to administer. No, there's a lot of details. It doesn't have to really be that difficult with proper planning. We're going to go over the grant terms, preliminary engineering phase, talk about environmental review, and then getting into the construction phase. Kelly will discuss some procurement, reimbursement procedures, and then project closeout. So when you are the selected project, you will be contacted by Kelly and notified of those committee results. The DCR staff will then perform an on-site pre-inspection and go over the project details with you in person. We can answer the questions up front. We can talk about any details that were not clear in the application or any other such details. We will work with you to finalize the scope of work statement. Usually this is really just a couple detailed sentences, but it will be nailing down exactly what you will be doing and what the federal highways will understand that you're doing. So DCR on your behalf will submit the project to Federal Highways Administration for authorization, but do not begin any billable work until a agreement is sent to you and signed by both DCR and yourself, your locality or agency. So just so you know, the committee is recommending for funding or not selected, and it may end up that the full request amount cannot be met. So we will discuss that with you, the applicant, if need be. It just depends on how the committee, all the results roll out. So the grant term is for 3 years. Federal Highways approves all of these for a 3-year period, and it occurs in 2 different phases, preliminary engineering and construction. So typically each one can take 18 months, but that's give or take. Some groups lately have been able to do the preliminary engineering a little faster. So the preliminary engineering, or PE, includes your National Environmental Protection Act review and acquiring permits if needed, and then wrapping up that completion of design plans. Once that, especially once that NEPA is completed, we do submit that to the Federal Highways Administration. It's their responsibility and authority to approve that. Then you can get approval to move towards construction. DCR does review just preliminary review really to the bid documents prior to posting them. We're really looking to see if you are putting in the requirements and full disclosure to those contractors that Buy America, Build America will be included, that it is federal funding and they have to comply with certain um, federal regulations for that. Um, and then the design must be competitively procured for engineering following state procurement regs and the DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprises. Um, I think that's good. Preliminary engineering phase, to get into that a little bit more. This is really an environmental analysis. You can do this in-house if you have time and energy, or you can contract this out with a consultant. We do have in the manual, the guidance documents on our DCR RTP website, a lot of information about how to do the environmental review. So do take a look at this. There's a full description and guidance on how to contact all those necessary agencies. Section 106 is in relation to historic properties. So the process is to contact the state and federal agencies with the same project details to each one, save that correspondence, and then fill out all the forms or the online databases that they have. Most RTP projects qualify for a categorical exclusion or CE. We assume that they are, and we have a form for you to complete that leads in that direction. But we do need to show due diligence to the Federal Highways Administration that agencies, including the Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Historic Resources, and in some cases, the U.S. Army Corps have been contacted. There's also a component of providing a period of public comment, and that is laid out in our documents as well. So then, like I said, this must be completed and submitted to the Federal Highways Administration prior to bidding for construction and prior to any on-the-ground work. Next, so when applying, make sure to include what you believe needs to be done to complete the PE scope of work. List what permits you believe you will need. You don't have to have them in hand at the time of application. We just want to ensure that you know what you're going to have to need. Also, describe any engineering that will need to be done. And then if contracted, the bid documents and final reports billing from the engineer will be needed. So you can get reimbursed for that PE work done within the project period. You can provide those invoices and be reimbursed for them. After all of that is complete, and yes, it's rather detailed for the preliminary engineering phase, but then you get to go towards construction. It's all worth it. The PE phase must be closed out prior to beginning construction. You will, be in conversation with Kelly Seaton about that transition from PE phase to construction phase. Your permits will be obtained either by yourself or by your contractor. And then DCR will let you know that the bid documents were reviewed. And then we all get very excited to start construction. Kelly's going to talk a little bit about procurement here to ensure that everything is going to go smoothly per the requirements. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Crystal. So yeah, any expense that you have on the project does need to be competitively procured following primarily the state public procurement procedures, but there's a few kind of extra requirements because of the federal funding. The kind of main thing to remember is that all of your posting, solicitations, RFPs and invitation for bids that we have a statement that's in our procurement guidance document that kind of in short, what's on the screen, letting folks know that partial funding is provided by this RTP program, these certain code of federal regulations apply to it, so that all of the bidders and potential bidders are aware of the requirements that they're going to be held to complete work on an RTP funded project. The FHWA 1273, those are the contract provisions that need to be included in an RTP funded project. So that's something you can find it online, but we'll also provide you when the project is awarded to share with, include in your bid packages and make sure it gets incorporated into any contracts. 2 CFR 200, those are the federal aid procurement requirements. So these projects are subject to those, but generally they say that a state can develop their own procedures, so that is why we hold you primarily to the Virginia Public Procurement Act standards. Important to note with that, for especially maintenance projects where you have like smaller things that you're going to be purchasing, maybe materials. So the Virginia Public Procurement Act does allow a entity to have established small purchase procedures, but you can only use them for RTP funded work if they're established and approved ahead of time, and they have to, they have to be documented and well written. So we can use those small purchase procedures for different costs associated with RTP projects, but your entity has to have those already established before you go to purchase those items. Like I mentioned, we have a procurement procedures document that I'll outline in a couple slides here of how to get to that on our website if you haven't been able to click around in there yet. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this new waiver of Buy America requirements for small grants. So any grant and any of our grants that where the total federal funding is under $500,000. So we do expect almost all of our grants to be under $500,000. There may, perhaps we'll have a motorized project that is more fun that could be awarded a higher amount. But so all those projects that are less than $500,000 and don't have other federal fund sources that increase the total federal funding above that are now exempt. And so this is a new development for the RTP program. Iron and steel for, since the beginning of the program has had to be fully domestically sourced and produced, but they did issue this waiver for small grants like RTP. So you won't have to comply with that anymore. However, all of our documents, you still will be signing that you're in compliance with those regulations, but you're qualifying for the exception. So you don't have to then proceed with sourcing the compliant materials. And then the last note here, because everything has to be competitively procured, RTP does specifically allow you to hire a youth conservation corps non-competitively. So you can discuss with them. You don't have to solicit bids for the work. So the regulations say qualified youth corps, and when I've asked for guidance, they have said that means corps that are listed on the Corps Network job site. So in Virginia, that would be organizations like Appalachian Conservation Corps or the Student Conservation Association. You can work with them directly without having to post it for public bidding. All right, so once you have expenses on your grant and you're ready for reimbursement, the key is that you have to have already spent that. So whenever we can process a reimbursement as soon as you have both the invoice and then documentation that you've paid it. So typically we ask folks for copies of the cleared checks or copies of the bank statement showing the funding going out. If you're not doing a straight, like maybe you submitted an invoice for $10,000, the simplest way is then we will be able to pay back $8,000 to you. Now, if you are using one of the other eligible match items like volunteer labor or something donated as your match, then we'll need some documentation for that when you go to submit the reimbursement. We have a few forms that we require for reimbursement, one being kind of a summary sheet that gets a signature, and then some tables that allow us to see if you have multiple invoices or multiple volunteers working on the project. We can see specifically what each one was working on. And then I already discussed the iron and steel requirements and Buy America. If we do end up with a grant or your total federal funding is $500,000 or greater, we'll need some documentation showing that all those materials were fully domestically produced and sourced. All right, so on our website, as I mentioned, this is just this little screenshot from our website. So if you scroll down below, the DCR RTP page, below where the 2024 application documents are, this section at the bottom, documents and forms for grant recipients. So within those drop downs are where you'll get all the forms that we've been referencing. So the third tab down there will have that environmental review guidance that Crystal mentioned. All the reimbursement documents are in that second one, and then the procurement one that we mentioned. In addition to a copy of this year's manual, we leave that posted after the grant round is available there as well. We have one more slide on reimbursements. Probably should have put this before the last slide, but we do recommend that you do them every 3 months. We'll outline an actual hard deadlines of when reimbursements need to be submitted in your grant agreement if selected, but we encourage folks to submit them every 3 months. We can go a little longer depending on your project needs and status, or a little shorter. We have folks that submit reimbursement requests monthly. It can take 4 to 8 weeks for that full process to be completed, because you'll submit us a package, we review it, prepare some forms, send it to Federal Highway Administration, who reviews it, releases the funds back to us, and then we release the funds to you. So that process just can take a little time, especially if there's any delays or someone's out of the office of our typical folks that work on that process. So 4 to 8 weeks is a typically, I would say almost all of them are processed within that time frame. Every once in a while, they can go through a little quicker um, if we need to. And then when you do submit that first reimbursement, we'll need your W-9 information. And we also, as part of like the 2 CFR federal aid requirements, any applicant will have to, not applicant, if you're selected to move forward with an award, you'll need to register on sam.gov if the organization is not registered already, and obtain the identifier number. All right, now we just had a great RTP project. You're ready to close out. So the official closeout process starts once all your deliverables are complete and you submitted that final reimbursement. We want to, make sure we can pay out all the funds. You don't have any other expenses that come up. If there's still funds remaining on the grant. We ask for a final report that we have a few things that will be listed in the grant agreement to include, but in short, it's kind of some photos of the project, what was accomplished with the project, if there were any issues or delays, and then a summary of disadvantaged business enterprise and small women and minority owned business involvement. I didn't mention this on the procurement slide, but there is a requirement with this program when you're bidding, but when you're soliciting competitively for both an RFP or your bid documents, to utilize DBE and SWAM businesses wherever possible, or not to utilize them, but to give them the opportunity to compete. So this typically looks like, posting and sending your bid packages to the businesses that meet those qualifications, or posting it in locations where those businesses can view your posting. And we have some more guidance on that in that procurement procedures document. And then we'll also, one of the best parts of our job is to come out and do a site inspection and see this great work that you've done. So we'll do a site inspection as part of the closeout process as well. All right, so to wrap up project administration, in short, yes, there's more procedures that you're going to have to go through than likely if you were to complete this project without the federal funding. But, as long as you know about them ahead of time, and we kind of factor both the cost and the time for those into your schedule and your budget, they're certainly very doable. And we don't want to scare you away with those requirements. We have typically it's a 3-year project period, is what the grant will be authorized for. But if you do encounter an unanticipated project delay or something in the project changes, our goal is to get a completed, constructed, something that the public can use to, our goal is for that to result from the project. So we will try to work with you and work with the Federal Highway Administration to advocate for adjusting the scope if we need to, or requesting an extension if we need to. Of course, nothing would be guaranteed, but we have been able to obtain extensions on projects where things came up throughout the project period. All right, so I'll stop now for some questions. I know some have been coming in and Crystal's been typing them. We can read those out loud so folks that are on the phone can hear them. Crystal, you want to start?
You did answer this. Is there a time limit for project completion? And that'll be 3 years from the authorization, September 2024 through 2027. And as you mentioned, amendments or our extensions are allowed. Copy of the PowerPoint will be posted, both the PowerPoint and the recording, either tomorrow or Thursday. Are nonprofits that are not 501c3 eligible?
Yes, so the RTP regulations do allow nonprofits that are not 501c3s to apply. The only, I guess, limitation that I don't know the specifics of are you able to register on sam.gov if you are not a 501c3 or another type of the 501 registered nonprofit. organization. So if that applies to you, you can reach out to us directly, and we can look into that further.
Okay. That leads into, do you have to be registered on SAMS.gov prior to submitting the application, or can you wait until you are awarded? You can wait until you are awarded in that case. And then we just got a question. Does DCR have any standard template legal agreements between the applicant and the public entity owning the land, such as DOC, DCR, and DOF? Template legal agreements.
We
We had,
do not for the RTP program, or I guess we don't have any templates, and I can't think of a recent grant in which we had those agreements. Um, so that's another case that you could reach out to us directly and we can ask around and see if, if you explain exactly who you're working with, we can talk with our contacts with those folks and see if they have any examples from the past.
okay. That's all the questions I see at this point.
All right, thank you, Crystal. So now we're going to switch, specifically focusing on the grant application. Um, so I'll start with kind of going over what's in a complete application, but then we'll also go through section by section and have some guidance for how to answer certain pieces and parts, and how those things will be evaluated. All right, so to start, the application file itself that was available on that DCR RTP website, it's a Microsoft Word document and a separate PDF form that's the certification form that gets signed. We just separated those out because often, um, to get the signatures, you may be scanning it, and it seems easier for folks to work in the Word document for putting all the pieces and parts in it, and just pulled off that certification form so you can use that to obtain your signatures. We ask that you do create, if possible, create a PDF of everything, create one PDF of everything when you submit it. So put that certification form, as the front page, and then you have your Microsoft Word document that you've converted to a PDF, and insert all your attachments that we ask for in that spot. In the application. So, we ask for some attachments between section 2 and 3, for example. So you'll put your those files right between section 2 and 3 of the attachment, and it helps our review committee when they're looking at your application and comparing it as they're working through our scoring criteria and evaluating the project to have those kind of in place. But if you're not able to do that, certainly that will not hinder your project. It won't impact the scoring. I can sort those out afterwards if you apply, if you're not able to do that or don't have the software to do that. There's a maximum 35 pages, but we don't have any word counts for questions. So, if you want to go longer on one question, you certainly can. You may have to shorten up the answer to another response. We do just ask the minimum 10-point font because some of our reviewers do evaluate these on printed versions, are not able to zoom into them on a computer screen. And 25 megabytes for the file size. If you think your file size may exceed that, we ask that you reach out to us first. So if you have another file transfer system, we can typically use that, or you can divide it into 2 files, or even we since last year we've changed our email software, so we may be able to accept ones that are a little bigger too. We just haven't tried it out yet, and I don't want to risk anything not coming in. If for any reason you're unable to use any of these documents, just reach out to us and I can give you a kind of a plain text version to fill out. And we have a whole appendix to the manual as afterwards in the same file document that has application guidance too. So it's a little more detailed even than what we'll go through today as far to how to answer specific questions and how to access different mappers and resources we ask you to look into. All right, that certification form is the first page that you'll include in your document. For applicant name, that should be the grant recipient. So this would be the one that actually enters into the legal agreement with DCR if the project is selected. And then for contact person, please list the kind of, day-to-day coordinator for the project, the person that would be sending us all the grant correspondence, we'd be able to reach out to if we have any questions. And that can be different than at the bottom, the signatory authority who authorizes you to apply for the grant. That can be someone that we can copy them on correspondence, but that may be someone different than the primary contact coordinator who's working on all the little pieces and parts of the project. And then a lot of the information for this sheet that we collect is for our general grant reporting processes and is not necessarily related to the RTP program specifically. So those, congressional districts and tax parcel information, we collect that for all of our grant applicants. All right, now diving into the application, the Word document itself. So section 1, these are the project details for all applicants, all project types fill this out. You're not necessarily evaluated on these except with how it would relate to the project completeness item that we score on at the end of the scoring criteria. But for a project title, something that's descriptive but not too long, 4 to 8 words is probably the sweet spot there. The project category, that's that motorized, non-motorized, single use, or diversified that Crystal spoke about. As we outlined, there's greater definitions of those in our manual, but if you are unsure, you can contact us. And also we will typically, if we receive an application and we think based on the uses that and design that you've described that it may fit another category, we do frequently evaluate them in both categories, and we'll determine that after the fact as well. The scope should be your RTP funded project scope only. So if RTP is funding, you're doing maybe you're doing a new parking lot with a restroom and the first mile of trail, and that's your full project, but you really only went to RTP to fund the restroom. So we would just want the scope of the restroom in there. Unless, you're doing the whole thing as a project and that whole scope will be completing the RTP required environmental review and procurement and everything. And then this section has the most attachments because it's just all the information we need to evaluate the project. So location maps, this is just to help us because we also ask for the lat long, but sometimes, if you give me the lat long for your trail and I put it in, it may just pop up in the middle of the woods somewhere. And I don't know exactly, like, is that where the trail is or is that where your parking lot is? Or so the location maps just help us to be able to navigate and get there quickly. And especially if some of our viewers are evaluating when they're not online, an ability to quickly look up your lat long code. A trail map or park map with the project locations identified, that again will help us understand how this project fits into the larger recreation area, if that's applicable, or just the basic layout of that trail system that you're working on, or individual trail. Existing site photos. So those if you're crunched for your pages to stay under the 35 page limit, you can fit multiple of these on one page. They're really just to help us get an understanding of what the project site looks like, and especially for maintenance projects, these really help demonstrate the project need. So I certainly encourage you to include good photos that really demonstrate the need for this project with those, especially maintenance projects. And then we've discussed this a little bit up till now, but the proof of right of way, if you're not the landowner, so that is either showing that you have an easement already or an agreement to be able to use that property, a letter from the property owner saying that you're going to enter into that agreement, or that you have that agreement in place. Those are kind of the specifics we need are outlined in the application itself there and in the guidance document. And then if you are a nonprofit applicant, we need that letter of support from the locality. And that is so what we're looking for there, and this is a change from in years past. We used to ask for you to actually have a formal agreement with the locality. that you're in. Now we, as that former question was, you can apply directly as a nonprofit organization, you can receive the funds, but we do request a letter so we know the locality is supportive of it, because they are the ones that are most likely to be able to, they may need to review the project, and we don't want to get further down the line and realize that there's local opposition to it. So we want to know that they're generally supportive of the project, and then we encourage you to develop a relationship with the locality so that they may be able to assist you and advise you in what types of permits are required for the project, and whether they're also probably more experienced, not necessarily, but they could be more experienced in completing the environmental review if they've received other federal funds in the past, or other state funds that require them to complete this level of an environmental review. So we just encourage you to develop those relationships. It's not absolutely required, because maybe you have folks with that experience already on your staff, or you could hire someone to do those as well. So it's just that is, purely a recommendation, but it's definitely helped some of our nonprofit applicants in the past. All right, so section 2, this is what's different from, the last couple years in applications. So for section 2, we actually have it split between 2 different sections, so A and B, depending on the type of project that you are. So section 2A, that's the project need for a new trail construction. If you're doing a new trail in addition to an existing trail, but it's new construction, construction of a new water trail access point, any kind of new construction things that aren't associated or right on an established trail already. So these are the types of projects that were not eligible last year. And that's section A. And then the next slide I'll talk about is section B, and those are for maintenance and amenity projects on existing trails. The sections are worth the same amount of points, so you'll just be evaluated on either or of those. And then the points will add up in the end. So if you're a new trail construction project, or in addition, new construction, that's an extension of a trail, you fill out this section A, and this is the most lengthy section, probably, I think, or most time consuming, because you have to look at a few different mappers and things. One being the DCR nature-based recreation access model and the Conserve Virginia models. So we have guidance, those are GIS-based statewide mappers that are available online, and we have specific steps, links, and then screenshots of what those look like and how to find the information that you need. We have those outlined in the appendix A that's included with the manual. And then we asked a couple questions about how the project meets needs identified in the Virginia Outdoors Plan. So for this, we're using the 2018 VOP still, and you can find that information that we're asking for. It's also in the application, but you can find it in the Trails chapter for the trail information, and then regional featured projects are at the end of each region section. If you have any questions on the VOP or how to access that, you can also reach out to us, and we're happy to help you with that. But there's links and guidance in that appendix on how to do that. So those are new trail construction. Now, if you are not new trail, you're doing maintenance or amenities on an existing trail, you answer to B instead. A point here for all of the questions, if there's frequently we'll have a question and then some bullets underneath it. Please be sure to respond to each of those bulleted items, because they may correspond to something that we're evaluating and scoring on. So make sure to do that. The project need for maintenance and amenities is maybe a little more straightforward than not straightforward. There's fewer questions than for a new trail construction, but it's the same total number of points. If you think your project is doing pieces of both of these, you're doing a new part of trail, but you're also doing a maintenance for an existing trail, then fill out both of the sections and you will receive the higher score of the two. So our committee will score you on both, but then it's 20 points. So if you get 18 on one section and 15 on the other, you'll get 18 points for that section. Now, if you're not sure which one it fits, you can reach out to us and we can help determine that before you submit the application. Or if in doubt, fill out them both and we can determine that after the fact, and you'll still receive the higher score of the two if it meets those, or if we think it doesn't really meet it doesn't meet the one or the other, then we will just evaluate it on the one. So, either in any circumstance, your max score is still 20 points for this section, but we understand that some project, the specifics of some projects may make it not as black and white as we've outlined here. All right, section 3, this is all around public involvement, both in the past and the future, and public support for the project and the project's likely impact. So this is back to everybody completes this in the remainder of the application. So it's just that section 2 that has the either or. For this, we have a question again about whether you're utilizing a youth corps. We'd like to know about that so we can know if we may need to look for that or advise you on that non-competitive procurement allowance, or if you just have general youth involvement, that's something that is awarded in the scoring too, whether you have local youth groups involved with the project, if you have some volunteer pieces and parts, we certainly encourage that. There's a question on how the project provides access for people with disabilities. For that item, we have another appendix at the end of the manual that lists some good accessibility resources that we've found or used in our work. And this section, we do have request an attachment of documents from local and regional plans if the project meets needs identified in those plans. And if you're a nonprofit organization, that can include the local plans of the locality or region that you're in. So you may have to look or work with those folks to obtain copies of those, or your nonprofit organization itself. We also would be interested in those your long-term plans. If you have additional pages, if you have within your page allowance, you're able to include some of those. We just ask for, we have the page limit of up to 4 pages because we don't need all of the pages. We just need the pages that show, that specifically call out the thing that this project meets or call out the project as part of their long-range plans. You can include a link to the full planning document for reference if any of us want to go and look at that when we're evaluating, but please just include that maximum of 4 pages of those local plans. All right, section 4 is all about project implementation. So these are really the details of your project and how it's going to get done. The schedule, and this is an area, I would say maybe a typical area of where folks lose points on our applications, are the schedule. We want you to be detailed, but this should be the schedule not just to complete the project if you didn't receive grant funding, but we also need you to know you're factoring in some of these pieces of the grant that will take longer because you got, or pieces of the project that will take longer because you got the grant. So that time to complete the environmental review, factoring in that we have to submit that NEPA review package to federal highways. Those types of things are what we're looking for in the schedule, just to make sure that the schedule is accurate for the project. Sometimes I would say we frequently, folks underestimate the length of time it'll take to complete the project. The quickest we've ever had an RTP project complete is about a year, but it is pretty typical for the projects to take at least 2 or the full 3 years. It is rare for us to have projects that are complete quicker than that. For the budget, just note that there's 2 parts we're asking for there. We want you to attach a budget, but we also want you to explain how it was estimated. So that's just providing us some information on whether, you're the engineering consultant that designed the project, you got an estimate from them, or whether your staff that have constructed the same thing in our other parks last year did the exact same thing for this cost. We're going to apply this factor as inflation. So really explain to us how you came up with that number and kind of who contributed to that. And that helps us evaluate the reasonableness of the budget. And our committee is very interested in that. So for grant match, we want to know how you're covering that matching share. And we ask for specific itemized values. So if you're going to have volunteer labor, we want to know an estimate of, you think you'll have 1,000 hours of volunteer labor at this rate. So that's this value. You're going to get donated materials and the value will be this amount. You're going to cover $10,000 as cash match, and we want those broken down. For procurement, the application, you'll notice it asks a question about Build America, Buy America, and the iron and steel compliance. But so we still ask you to, you're not being scored on that, but we're still asking you to just fill out that question. Partly because when we created the application this year, we didn't yet know the applicability of that waiver and whether iron and steel really were exempt. We're glad that most of the projects won't have to consider that, and just maybe a few of you will if for those higher dollar projects or projects with other federal funds on them. So just know that we are asking that, but you're not necessarily being evaluated on it. And the attachments for this section are the schedule, if you don't include it in the box that asks for the schedule question, the budget, that typically is an attachment. If if it ends up you can fit it in the section, you can certainly include it there. And then proof of matching fund availability is also required for this section. All right, so then last section, well, there's one section at the end that's just a past grant experience, but the second to last section in your application is this 5 design and environmental impact. So that is asking kind of the status of your design up to this point, what type of, if you're following any design standards. Again, the grant can fund additional design work if the project still needs design work. We just want to know where you are at in the process and where what you estimate will still be needed to complete that. For the environmental review, also the question, we're not evaluating you on the level of completeness of this. We're really mostly evaluating on just whether you understand kind of what you're getting into and how that may impact your project and primarily how it impacts the schedule and kind of benchmarks that you have to hit before you can proceed to construction. And then attachments for this section are, again, a limit of 4 pages of your design or preliminary design plans if it's more conceptual at this phase and you're applying for funding for the design. We ask for up to 4 pages, and this is another example where if the project moves forward, we will ask for those full design packages, but really at this level, we just want to see an overview of the design and get an understanding of how far you are, whether you have the 100% design drawings or whether they're more conceptual or preliminary designs. All right, so now that the application is complete, we will collect them up and evaluate them here at DCR and send them to our advisory committee. So the evaluation and scoring criteria we're using, it was revised from last year. Some of the questions are the same, or some of the evaluative factors are the same, but some are a little different. So please take a look at that. It's posted with the application documents. It goes in the order of the application, so you can see how you'll be evaluated. When we receive your application by May 7th, we'll review it internally here first, and then making sure it's just eligible and the application's complete, and then we'll turn it around and send it to our advisory committee, and they review all the applications, they score them, they send their scores back to me, and I'll compile a big spreadsheet. We'll average out all the scores, and we'll meet and review everything and discuss the projects. So that process will happen in May and June. And then I expect to be reaching out to folks to let them know that they've been recommended for funding in probably late June. It may be early July. All right, so now we just have like one slide after this, not about RTP, but we'll stop now and answer any more questions that you have, or you can feel free to enter them if you haven't already.
One question came in, are PDCs, Planning District Commissions, eligible to apply as the project manager or fiscal agent on behalf of one of our localities? Does a letter of support suffice as documentation for that sort of thing? We've had a couple different scenarios of PDCs and locality partnerships. Yes, PDCs are eligible to apply as well as localities are. If you're going to be working together, I would say, get your finance teams together and see how you want to do it. It just depends on what's best for you. And I think that covers that pretty well. And then another question, would construction of a maintenance building for storing equipment, et cetera, be an eligible project? That's a tricky one. What do you think, Kelly? If it's just a maintenance building, I would say that would rank pretty low, at least on our scoring.
Yeah, I would agree. I can't say for sure it wouldn't be eligible. We'd have to look into the regulations a little bit. But because most of the evaluative factors are on the public impact and the public's use of the trail. So I think it would likely not score high. Not that I don't want to say it's not needed at all, but just the public access focus of this program, I think would maybe not allow it to be funded. But we can, if you want to reach out to us directly again to with this and your other questions, we can look into that a little more to see specifically if it could be funded as part of a larger project.
Oops. Um, Typo there, but I'm entering our email here for anybody that wants to email us afterwards. Um, I'm not seeing any other questions coming up in the chat.
Okay, I'll move on to our next slide for you, Crystal.
All right, well, thank you everybody for attending this webinar. I know it's a lot of information, but we're excited to see your projects. Here at the Division of Planning Recreation Resources, we do oversee the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We actually have the 2024 applications out right now. And I know the deadline's approaching April 18th, but that's an exciting opportunity for both the acquisition and or the development of outdoor recreation sites and amenities. So in this case, trails do count, even some maintenance facilities, and we receive about $6.5 million a year for this program, and it's a 50-50 match. Um, the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation is administered by our colleagues in DCR Land Conservation. This is a Virginia fund that protects open spaces and parklands, lands of historic or cultural significance, farmlands and forests, and also natural areas. So often people that are looking to eventually do trails do apply for the open spaces and parklands. The 2024 grant round is waiting to be announced, expected to open in summer. Also, VDOT has some programs that are related to trails as well. Our Transportation Alternatives Program funds pedestrian and bicycle facilities, as well as cultural, historical, and environmental enhancements to transportation infrastructure. So they have a broader scope than what the Recreational Trails Program has. This is usually a every other year program, so this is going to be in 2025, but they're currently accepting Ready, Set, Go, which is a technical assistance program. So that can help you greatly with the assessment and preliminary design and that kind of thing. So do check that out. And lastly, a new program. This is from Federal Highways Administration. It's called ATIP, Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. We all love acronyms. So this is also about active transportation networks. It's open. Please follow the link, and those applications are due June 17th. Lastly, you can check out the Department of Transportation, both pedestrian and bicycle opportunities at the link provided below. I think that's everything. We really, truly appreciate you. Here's our email, Kelly's phone number, and go find the application. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Crystal. All right, there's one more question in the chat while you're speaking there. The question was if a locality or PDC has multiple potential projects, can they submit more than one application? And the answer to that is yes, you can. However, because of how competitive the funding is and our committee's desire to disperse the funds, it is unlikely more than one of them would be funded, but you can submit more than one and we can evaluate them. So, you know, the highest scoring one would be your most likely one to be funded. And I can add, so if anyone did want to ask a question, want to speak a question, you should be able to unmute yourselves now if you'd like to do that.